Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Shir. Today's Thursday of Parshas Behar, Tafshin Pei Daled. Today's Shir has been dedicated by one of our regular listeners. He listens to the recording, lives in Bangkok. Perhaps I mentioned his name before, Rabbi Shmuel Avram Brill. And he's dedicated tonight's Shir to the Shluchim, the head Shluchim of Thailand. That's Rabbi Yosef Chaim and his wife Medina Kantor and their family. It's now 30 years since they've gone out on shlichus to Thailand, and it's tremendous hatzlocha. I'm sure many of you are familiar with. There's also a lot of activity there with travelers, the backpackers, but it's all under the auspices of Rabbi Kantor, and Rabbi Shmuel Avram is very grateful for them, for their being there and personal involvement. So that's his bracha to them, to many more years of hatzlocha in their shlichus in good health. Before going into today's shir, I want to share with you a new development. I've been telling you perhaps on and off about a new edition of the Siddur of the Alter Rebbe Siddur with the sources and comments, which is something which I published about 20 years ago, and now it's a new edition. It's ready to roll. It just needs to have a bit of a cash injection. So that's the appeal page. Anyone who wants to be able to contribute. I know it's a substantial contribution, but Bezos Hashem. So you have here, there's the Kahos in New York have put up a page for the fundraising for this, and Bezos Hashem will be in touch with whoever wants to take a share in this project. Bezos Hashem. Okay, so that's just been launched today. You can see the goal is $60,000. Bezos Hashem will get there speedily. Right. We'll come back to that at the end of the shir. Let's go now into our actual shir. So last Motzei Shabbos, someone calls me up. It must have been about 12 o'clock. And he had benched. Then he realized that in benching a Motzei Shabbos, he had said Ritzei. So he's asking, do I have to bench again? Because, Motzei Shabbos is already weekday. And he said as if it was Shabbos. So he included Shabbos stuff in benching. So what you have on the screen here is from the Ksos HaShulchan from Reb Chaim Noah, who writes that if during a weekday you had said a Ritzei in benching or Yalav Yoveh in benching, so he says if you're middle of benching, you should go back to that bracha and correct it. But if you finish benching, you don't have to go back to the beginning of benching. So that you have a clear psak that this mistake does not, having said Yalav Yoveh or Ritzei when it wasn't warranted, doesn't oblige you to go back to the beginning of the benching. That's the psak, which I found quickly on Motzei Shabbos, Sefer Shiyos Miyovin, but then I spent some time looking it up and want to share it with you. So where does Reb Chaim Noah get his ruling? And so he's comparing this, first of all, to Shemona Esrei. What would happen if you included something in Shemona Esrei which you shouldn't have? You thought it was, you're half asleep, and you said Yalav Yoveh in your Shemona Esrei. So you have to repeat the Shemona Esrei. And so this is where we have in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, it's Siman Kuf Ches. One who makes a mistake and mentions Mo'ira, the events of another day in a tefillah, Shaloi Bizmana, when it's not the right time. So, for example, he said Yalav Yoveh, it's not Rosh Chodesh Nuchal HaMoed. Or he mentioned Shabbos or Yom Tov stuff on a weekday. So the first opinion says Yesh oimrim, there are those who say that mentioning something which doesn't belong that day, that's not considered a hefsek. It's not considered an interruption to have to warrant repeating the Shmoyne Esrei. So the first opinion says it's not a problem. Second opinion says it is a problem. Yesh oimrim, that it's as if you had chatted about, I don't know, Arsenal's against Spurs in the middle of Shemon Esrei, which has got nothing to do with davening, yeah, for most of us. So then, therefore, you'd have to go back to the beginning of davening if you put in something totally foreign to davening. So in Shemon Esrei, if you said Yalav V'Yoveh when it wasn't warranted, so the first opinion says you don't have to repeat Shemon Esrei. The second opinion says you do have to because it doesn't belong there. Le'inyan halacha, although generally we'll take the view of Sofek Brochas Lahakel, that you don't have to repeat the benching, sorry, the Shemona Esrei, but in Shemona Esrei, the recommendation is, since there's the famous Lashon of Rabbi Yochanan, Halavai she'yispadel ha'odam kol hayom kol hayom, a person, Halavai, I don't know what the English word for Halavai is, but if only you could say, you could daven a whole day, wonderful. So therefore, davening is a good thing anytime. So therefore, it's recommended that in this case, a person said Yalav Yova when it's not warranted, he should repeat the Shemona Esrei. But you see it as a Nedava, Tfilas and Dov. So what we're seeing, it's not so clear cut that by mentioning something which is out of order for the day warrants that you repeat it. Shemona Esrei, okay, you repeat the Tfilas and Dov. But when it comes to benching, there's no such thing as benching a Nedava. And here we have from Taka Bichas in Kufpei Gimel, where it talks about in the olden times, the style was the Mizamein, the leader of the benching, would say the benching aloud, and everyone else was listening. And so the people who are listening shouldn't be talking about anything about other stuff whilst they're listening. Now, just like the one who's leading the benching shouldn't be talking about other stuff, so they also shouldn't. V'im over v'sochu, if the listeners did violate and they did chat about unrelated stuff to benching, but it was between bracha and bracha, and it was at a moment where the leader of the benching had fallen silent for a moment. So in yotzu, they yotze. So here we're seeing that in benching, even if they put in something which was totally irrelevant to the benching, they don't have to repeat the benching. And how much more so in the case of putting in Yalav or something, which even a Shemona Esrei, there's a svara to say that you don't have to repeat the benching. So therefore, that remains the bottom line. That if in benching on Motzei Shabbos, or any time of the week, or even benching, you did include it, say when it wasn't warranted, you do not have to repeat the benching. Okay, very clear. Let's move on to the next question. So a woman asked me this past week, she's expecting and sometimes has extreme thirst. And I was taught by my late mother, Leah Sholem, that when a woman is pregnant, you really go, well, if she needs something, whatever food, whatever it may be, you get it. You try very, very hard to get it. My mother used the word, even if you get fagel milk, which means milk from a bird, which obviously doesn't exist. So if a woman's pregnant and she needs something, you really try to accommodate that need. So now she's got this strong thirst, and she's asking. Sometimes it might be she's in the bath. Sometimes it's going to be on a Shabbos. She hasn't heard Kiddush. So can she have a drink of water then? So very, very interesting. There's a Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Mem Aleph, which says the following: that if it's all talking about protocol for bathing, and it says there, Rochatz b'chamin v'loy shoso mehen. If someone bathed in hot water and did not drink from that water, now that you see, there's a comment there. There's a little gimel suggesting that the word mehen doesn't belong. We'll see that in a moment. So if a person bathed in hot water and did not drink, It's as if it's comparable to an oven which has been heated on the outside and the inside is cold. So it's important to have hot water inside your body as well on the outside of your body. So it looks like the Gemara is suggesting that you should have a drink when you're in the bathhouse and you're in nice hot mikveh. So that's mibachutz. So you should also have hot water mibifnim. Okay, so then Rabbi Yaakov Emden, in his comments on that Gemara, he says, he doesn't mean you should drink the bath water. And he gives a reference to a Gemara that bath water may not be a good idea to drink. But it means you should have hot water. And he says that's implicit in Rashi. But then he asks a practical question. How can you have a drink of hot water in the bath when you can't make a bracha there? Because people in that area, by there, they're standing undressed. You can't make a bracha when people are undressed. Do it yourself. And he says, well, possibly the drinking here is not a drinking for thirst, but rather it's like the story if a person feels they're choking on something, got something stuck in their throat. So the Gemara says in brachas that you don't make a bracha when you're having a drink of water just to swallow. So let's say people using pills and they need to have a drink of water, you would not make a bracha on that water because you're not having it to quench your thirst. It's just to wash down the pill. So he's suggesting that this water in the bathhouse perhaps is a similar thing. It's not because of thirst. And since it's not for thirst, therefore you don't have to make a bracha. That's Rabbi Yaakov Emden, which doesn't help us in our case because the woman is experiencing thirst, and therefore she would have to make a bracha. So then we go on. We have, well, before going back to our case, still in the Gemara. So this I found in some, I did a bit of a search on the Yitzhak Chochmah. I was intrigued about this bracha or drinking in the bathhouse. So this is a fairly contemporary sefer, and he says that that the drink of hot water after it was not in the bath, but after going out from the Beis HaMerchatz. Not unlike the way the Rabbi Yaakov Emden understood it meant drinking. And he gives a reference to Tur, Kashayotzin mi Beis HaMerchatz. So he suggests that the hot drink is indeed to warm up the body, but not when in the bath house, but when you're just going out. Then he gives another suggestion. Actually, it's not talking about a cup of water, but it means actually a cup of wine. As we find sometimes that a person has just had bloodletting. So there is an idea of him having depleted his energy in the bloodletting. So to have a cup of wine to replenish the energy. And so they're suggesting the same thing. He's suggesting that perhaps the drink which is being said here in the Gemara is actually a drink of wine, and again after the bath. Okay, so that Gemara, the Poshtub Pshat of the Gemara suggests drinking water in the bathhouse, and with the attendant problems, a couple of solutions which don't really help us. The question is, if a person is in a hospital or something, and they have right near them something which has got a very bad smell. Now, you're not allowed to make a bracha in the presence of a very bad smell, an offensive smell. The person has no choice to move or not to move. They're stuck there. Do they have to starve also? Or are they allowed to have a drink or have food with it? And we can't make a bracha. So can they have food without a bracha? So, sorry, it's not on the screen, but I did see that the late Rav Vosner was asked this question, and he says that if you're onus, if it's not in your control to be able to make a bracha appropriately, then you are allowed to have food or drink without a bracha. That's where he paskins. Of course, at what stage you say, I'm desperate. So he talks about several hours a day, but in the case of this woman who's pregnant, I would say that, as I said before, you don't delay, and if she's very thirsty, can't make a bracha, she can have a drink without a bracha, make a bracha afterwards. What I did suggest to her is that before she goes into the bath room, she's going to prepare, she should have a drink. If she's a bit thirsty, she can make a bracha on water. If she's not thirsty, have a drink of orange juice or something, but have a drink of, make a shahakal before you go in, and you anticipate you'll be thirsty. Okay. So then that's what I suggested to her. Make a bracha before you go in, and then problem solved. So she got back to me and said, what about the problem of ruach ra? Of there's a general approach that we don't take food into a bathroom, a toilet, because of ruach hatum or something like that. Now, that is true. That's a general minhag. The earliest source for that is from the first Belzerov. So that's talking about 150 years ago. That's the earliest source that you have. I remember as a bocher, I learned in Brunois for a few years, and I used to be very Hamish with the Rosh Hashivas, Rabbi Goldberg, Rabbi Yosef Goldberg. And I remember they would kasher their chickens in the bath. They had like some kind of grid. I mean, it came to kashering chickens, and I'm sure I'd seen that elsewhere also. People kashering chickens in the bath. This is nowadays all of this is obsolete because we buy them very well packaged and all kashered and sliced and whatever. But when people used to kasher chickens at home, I believe it was quite common that people did it in the bath, and they didn't say, "Oh, it becomes ruach ra." Okay, so it's not such a big issue, this ruach ra business. Then the other, so that's not such a big issue as far as I'm concerned. If she needs, so this she could have a drink in the bath. Broch is the issue, but not the ruach ra. I don't see that such a big issue. Okay, so necessity. What about on Shabbos? So before Kiddush. So there is something not to have a drink before Kiddush Friday night. That's written clearly in Shulchan Aruch. Even water. Shabbos day, different. There's two opinions in Shulchan Aruch whether you're allowed to or not allowed to eat or drink before Kiddush. By Havdalah, min hadin, you are allowed to drink before Havdalah. It's in Chabad written Hayom is we don't. So there is room to be makel at least by day and before Havdalah. What I would say, well, I'm wondering by night. Okay, if she's desperately thirsty, to take a cup of wine or grape juice and make your own kiddush, and so, or if you can't handle grape juice, do and make a cup of tea. But you make your own kiddush. Who says you have to stop at the thirst if you need to drink? So okay, you can sort yourself out. Okay, let's move on. We were just recently learning in Gemara and Gemara Yuma about the whole, should we call the word fiasco, but where David HaMelech, unfortunately, was one of the mistakes which he made, the way it's discussed in the Gemara, although he wasn't. So he called for a counting of the Bnei Yisrael, a head count, and afterwards there was a plague, and so we were discussing at the table what's the reason why we should not be counting Yidden. So in the Posuk, in the beginning of Kisisa, it talks about giving a half a shekel, and it says you should give a shekel for half a shekel for each person. There will not be a plague by them being counted. So Rashi there says that counting is inviting, or it's allowing ayin hora. Set a number. We know the parallel to this is ein habrocha shoylet el bedova hasoma min ha'ayin. Something which is discrete is a receptacle for brocha. Something which has been more quantified, then it's not a keli for brocha so much, and that's what Rashi is saying, because it's a set number. Oh, this is the number. And that's going to invite that there will be a plague, as we find in these times of David. Just an interesting comment. There was never a comprehensive count of the Bnei Yisrael back in the desert. Of course, you're going to say there was a count with Masas Shekel. Now, it wasn't comprehensive, because it only counted males from 20 to 60, and it did not count Shevet Levi. Shevet Levi were counted from the age of 30 days old. And so you do not have accurate data, neither of the younger age or the older age, because you don't know how many, including Shevet Levi, how many 20 to 60s were there. We don't know, because we don't know the number of Bnei Levi, how many of them were between 20 and 60. So there was never a comprehensive count of the whole of Klal Yisrael. Okay, as I'm looking this up, so you read the Gemara how David made this mistake. How could he make such a mistake when there's a posting in Chumash? Well, a year bohem negef, do half a shekel, so that there should not be a plague. So here you can see the Sifsei Chachamim says that he thought that there was the count for the Machzas shekel for building the Oyel Moed to make the Adonim, and he thought that the count with half shekels was because they needed to have the fund for the Adonim. Carbonis. No. But in subsequent generations, perhaps it wouldn't apply. Then he says another point, that when it says bohem negef, perhaps he didn't see that the counting is inviting a negef. Rather, he says, your count, and you do a mitzvah, you bring carbonis, okay, if there is some gzardin, so the tzedakah will protect from it. So he did not see that the v'lo bohem negef was an automatic result, so to speak, of the counting, but rather it's saying that therefore you'll be protected from a negef. It doesn't say clearly that counting without without shtick will bring chas v'sholom a plague, and that was why he thought it was okay. Unfortunately, it wasn't okay, and as we say the story, we know that there was a plague, and that's why we have the halacha in the Gemara, which as it says that you're not allowed to count Yidden in the regular way. Famous Sikh of the Rebbe, which says that the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says to count for your minion, to count with Hoshia Samecha. In earliest form, Siddur Rashi says, I think it is attempted words of Avani, Beroiv, Chastacha, Ovoi, Vesecha, Eshtach, El, Hechel, Kodshecha, V'Yorosecha. So in earliest form, it has the posuk to count for your minion, Banis Filosi. And the Kitzur talks about the posuk Hoshia Samecha. And the Rebbe, in the later years, and he said, why did they change to using the posuk Hoshia Samecha? Because we're closer to the Geula, therefore the posuk of Hoshia Samecha was used rather than the posuk Vani Rev Chastacha. Okay, let's move on. So bread baked in a fleshige oven, milchige oven, does it become fleshig, milchig? And two parts of this question: what is the status of the bread baked in an oven, which is milchig or fleshig? And the other one is: are you allowed to bake milchige bread or fleshige bread? Now there is a halacha in Gemara that you're not allowed to bake a fleshige loaf of bread because of the possible michshel of people mixing up and having it with milk, and also you're not allowed to make a milchige loaf of bread. Well, most recipes in England, where bread is usually made with milk, we're not allowed to make bread with milk because of the worry of the mixer. In Eretz Yisrael, I think I mentioned this before, everyone knows that borekas, which are square, are parov, and borekas, which are triangle shaped, are milchik. Every kid knows a triangular boreka is milchik, it's got cheese in it. A square one will be potatoes or something like that. But that's not such common knowledge in this part of the world. So if you did want to make a milchik bread, you'd have to make it in a specific shape that people will know that this is unusual, and it's milchik, or I guess you have to create another kind of shape for fleshig, but you'd have to make it in a special shape. So now we've got here then two questions. One is, does the bread become milchik or fleshig? And number two, are you allowed to do it? So one connects to the other. Now let's read carefully this lashon from, as you can see, it's Yeridea, Siman Tzadik Hey. Beitzo shenispash lo b'mayim b'kdeiro choyleves. You have a milchik pot and you boiled an egg in water. So, par of food in a milchik pot. Mutter losses oise b'tochatar negoles. You are allowed to take that egg and use it for stuffing a chicken. Afilu lechatchila. So your egg boiled in a milchik pot remains parav to the point that you can now still put it into a fleshik dish. If it was nisbashlo b'kdeirim abos, if the egg was boiled together with meat, even if it was the egg shell was on it, also la'ochla b'kutach, then it becomes fleshik because it was cooked with meat, and despite the shell in between, it's going to become the egg is going to become fleshik, and you wouldn't be allowed to have it with kutach, which was some kind of tahina or whatever stuff made with lots of milk. So this is the position of the Mechaber, of the Rabbi Yosef Karo, that the par of a food cooked in a milchik pot does not become milchik. V'yesh mach, says the Ramo, v'yesh machmirin b'tzliyo or bishul. There are those who take a stricter view that if it wasn't just placed in a milchik dish, it was actually cooked in a milchik dish or roasted in a milchik dish, less noisen tam bar noisen tam, that we're going to say that the taste of the dish, or the pot rather, is going to enter the food again. So you've got the milk has been absorbed in the pot, and now the milk in the pot is now going to be absorbed in the egg. So that's notion tam by notion tam, a taste from the food into the milk food in the pot, and from the pot into the par of a food, and therefore it's got a milchika character to it. So we've got two opinions. Does an egg boiled in a milchik pot become milchik or not? Chabas says no, and Amos says others are machmir. V'haminhag le'ser lechatchila. So the minig is lechatchila that the egg boiled in a milchik pot would be considered milchik. And therefore, in the example of can you now use that egg to stuff a chicken, the answer is no. Whereas not lechatchila, but di'evet, if you took that milchik stroke par of egg and put it into a chicken, then it would be mutter b'chol inyan. So coming back to the question, we're talking about an oven, which is not mamish the same as a pot because there's the contact of the food with the oven is less. But taking that approach, bread baked in a milchik oven is not fully milchik. It's something which you would avoid lechatchila having with meat, but it does not cause any issue if the mix-up did happen. And the same thing, challahs baked in a meaty oven, so we wouldn't have cheese with those. We wouldn't have them with cheese or with butter. But if it did happen, it didn't. It doesn't make anything treif. If that's the case, certainly it's not a problem to bake challahs in a fleshik or milchik oven, although they're going to be lechatchila milchik or fleshik, whatever it may be. But if an accident happened, it's not so terrible, and therefore you are allowed to bake your challahs in a fleshik oven and so on. What is normally done is if you make cake and you do in a fleshik oven and you want to be able to have your cake with a cup of coffee with milk, so then the minhag is to kasher the oven by making sure it's cleaned and turning on the oven at full heat for half an hour, whatever it may be, for a while, and then we'll consider the oven no longer fleshik or become parav, and then the cakes which you baked inside that oven will then be considered totally parav, and you could have them with milk if you wished. Let's move on. So one of our shluchim here in the United Kingdom. He is in a community where there's a fairly large frum community, and he goes there sometimes. And he was listening to a shir, and it came up about the concept of kli shlishi. The Rav there was giving a shir, and he was not very supportive of the concept of kli shlishi. So he comes back to me and asks me about it. So I did some homework. So let's explain what's the story here. There is a rule that in Gemara that kli sheni eino mevashel. So you've got the pot sitting on the fire, that's called the kli rishon. You pour from that into a bowl, into a cup, that's called a kli sheni. And the understanding in the Gemara is that food put into a kli sheni will not cook, and therefore it's permitted to do so on Shabbos. Having said that, there is then another level called kalei habishul, foods which only need a little bit of cooking, a slight cooking, and that's enough to change them. And so from the Gemara we learn that kalei habishul will cook even in a kli sheni. Therefore, you're not allowed to put kalei habishul in a kli sheni. So, for example, let's say you had a matzah. Matzah is baked. You want to put it in soup. The soup is cooked. Now, food taste, the taste of cooked, the taste of baked is different. So, is there kind of, should we say, taking the matzah, putting it into a soup? We're going to upgrade it from a fiyah to bishul, a slight upgrade. Now, would that happen in a kli sheni? Possibly, because it's only a very slight change. And that's therefore should be a problem. To which therefore we have don't put matzah on Shabbos in a kli sheni of hot soup. So we know that. Does it help if I pour the soup from one bowl to another, kli shlishi? Does that solve the problem? So, and I'll tell you I've really never been comfortable with this, because I understand kli rishon has got the power that it's got heat absorbed in the material of the walls. Kli sheni is weaker because its walls were not on the fire. Therefore, the heat is dissipating. That's the difference between kli rishon and kli sheni. Panos mechamamois, panos mekaros. I never got my head around where is the difference between kli sheni and kli shlishi. I know that there's a movement from one to the other, but if I know that the water, or whatever it may be, oil in a kli shlishi is boiling hot, way beyond yad ledas boy, I don't see what's the difference of the dynamics of a kli sheni and kli shlishi. Seems to be both on the ebb, and there's the difference. And so now what we see here is that this is from the Sefer called Ureim, the Rebbe Lezer of Metz, one of the later Rishonim, and he talks about these things, kal habishul, not to put them in kli sheni, and not even in kli shlishi, which is yad ledas by, because we don't know whether these subtle changes will happen even in kli sheni. So he says clearly kli shlishi also not. But we do know that many of us have been taught that you make a cup of tea on Shabbos, so you pour from the kettle and on the urn into one cup, on the second cup, and that second cup you can put in a tea bag. That's very widespread, at least in Lubavitch, yeah. So, and I've got here on the second quote on the screen is from a Sefer Hilchos Hakalah from Rav Tvardovich, who is eminent Talmud Chochem in Kfar Chabad, and he writes very much about pouring. You want to make a cup of tea. He says, pour the water from the meicham, from the urn, pour it from one cup and then to another cup, and then you can add coffee, instant coffee, tea, sugar, etc. There are some other interesting things there, but he's certainly giving us the green light to make a cup of tea in a kli shlishi. I must tell you that I was brought up in my house that we had a little, besides the big Shabbos kettle, we had also a small teapot, an earthenware china teapot, and we put in a tea in that before Shabbos, and that stayed also on the blech. And so we had tea essence, and we would have when we want to make a cup of tea on Shabbos, we use that tea essence, and poured it into the cup with in the glass with hot water from the urn, and that's how we had. So we didn't use tea bags on Shabbos, but I'm going to say that many families I've seen do use them, relying on the concept of Kli Shlishi. So now I'm looking at the Rav Forkash Sefer. Rav Forkash is a contemporary with Oldank Lange, and he's currently working on a series of Sforim on Nichos Shabbos called Shabbos Kahalocha. His first volume is dedicated to Bishul, and the first chapter he addresses the Kli Shlishi concept. And he writes the following, that the poskim debate whether Kli Shlishi and onwards has got the same status. So whatever you're not allowed to do Kli Sheni, are you not allowed to do Kli Shlishi because of the concern that it will cook. Many are mekel, and indeed, and that's broadly followed. However, there are those who are machmir, and therefore, when it's not too difficult, one should be following other methods, which he discusses further on in the Sefer. So who's really a very thorough writer and Talmud Chochem, he's not confident with the Kli Shlishi story. Now, I just want to add one argument here, and that is there's a concept of sfek sfeika, which we often use in working out a halacha. So with the matzah, does matzah, which is now put in cooked, is it really a malacha? Because you're changing it, is it really a malacha? I don't know. Is Kli Shlishi the same as Kli Sheni? I don't know. So then, okay, we can use a sfek sfeika strategy and let it ride. When you say I've got tea which was dried out in Sri Lanka and put in little bags and brought to Sainsbury's and Waitrose, and now it's never been cooked. I put it into a Kli Shlishi. Either Kli Shlishi does cook or doesn't. I don't have another suffix here to bring into the equation. So I'm not so confident about it. From disappointing you, sorry. Okay. Let's go on to the next point, is that someone in Eretz Yisrael, he writes to me, says me questions. He's asking me that it's known that the Rambam takes the view that wine for Kiddush is only acceptable if it's acceptable on the Mizbeach. And therefore, Yain Mevushal, according to the Rambam, is not valid for Kiddush. And sweetened wine, which has got added sugar, is not valid for Kiddush, according to the Rambam. So, okay, person of Shtickle Talmud Chochem wants to also be conscientious with the Rambam. So this fellow is asking me the question. I've got yain, which is not mavusha, or not sweetened. It doesn't taste so good. And then we've got yain, which is sweetened, which I enjoy more. So should I opt to be machmir, to use dafka, the unsweetened wine, or can I go for a sweetened wine, even though it's at the expense of being machmir like the Rambam? So we have here, it's on the screen. This is from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, Siman Ein Reish Beis, and he brings here the Rambam's position that you shouldn't use neither boiled wine nor sweetened wine for Kiddush because it's not fit for the Mizbeach. Others disagree, and they say that some things are disqualified from the Mizbeach because they've got a bad smell or because they have been exposed, but something which is boiled, hasn't spoiled the wine, that's okay to use for Kiddush. And same thing, how much more so if it's been sweetened, that it's not, there's something wrong with the wine, the contrary, but it's just that there's something about the Mizbeach. We shouldn't put a dvash on the Mizbeach, we shouldn't put in sugars on the Mizbeach, but there's nothing wrong with the wine as so. And therefore, v'chein iker, the halacha is that you can use sweetened wine for Kiddush. And let's finish off the last line, which is the kind of the balance here. It is customary to use sweetened wine or boiled wine for Kiddush, even if you have another wine which hasn't been boiled, hasn't been sweetened, it's not as good quality. So it's okay to use a better quality sweetened wine, even though as a result you're not Yotze Kiddush according to the Rambam, because the halacha is not like the Rambam in this respect. I just want to throw in another point, and that is one Shabbos, I made Kiddush in Shul, and what I do after making Kiddush, I pour in little cups, and people can have from Kos Shabrochas. I'm sure many Shul do that. And just across the table from me, was someone who was not Jewish. He was in the process of Giyur. That wasn't known to everyone. He didn't have a badge with a big L plate. And so he was very helpful. He took one of those cups and gave it to the guy next to him. And before I could say boo, the guy had already drunk the cup. And I was very dismayed, because it means that this person, the person of Anash, had wine which had been handled by a non-Jew. So I insisted from then on that in our shul for Kiddush it has to be yain mevushal, and I would say that should be also standard in any similar setting where it's possible you have such a mirshal. Keep to yain mevushal. I know that I'm hearing this a lot now. People are saying that the mevushal is not as good quality. All right, but at least in I think it's something which one should try to have as a standard, where you have a risk that people who are non-Jewish or Chal Shabbos Farhesi will touch the wine, then to use Yain Mevushal. Let's move on. So this I got here a question. A shliach just moved out to a city. His background is he from Brazil, where there's the days are never so long and never so short as we have in Northern Europe or Northern anywhere, where we've got very long days in the summer and very short days in the winter. So he's working with young professionals, and so he's once a month he's going to do a Friday night dinner with his young professionals, and that's going to be, for this he's going to daven Ma'ariv early and Mikabel Shabbos early, and then the other 3 weeks he doesn't have this young professionals dinner. Can he be Mikabel Shabbos later? So can he one Shabbos be Mikabel Shabbos at 7:30, another Shabbos be Mikabel Shabbos at 9 o'clock? This is his question. Can he pick and choose 1 week yes, 1 week not? So let's take a look at Simon Reish Lamed Gimel. Now we have the famous thing that this machlokus, when is the end of Zman Mincha and the beginning of Zman Ma'ariv? So we've got a concept called Plaga Mincha, which is about an hour and a quarter before sunset, and according to the Rabbanon, Mincha can be done until sunset, and after that comes the time for Ma'ariv. Rabbi Yehuda says Mincha can only be done until Plaga Mincha. After Plaga Mincha is the time for Ma'ariv. So we have now, between, let's say, this time of the year, between 7:30 and 9 o'clock, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is Zman Ma'ariv, according to Rabbanon is Zman Mincha. So now, the way it's written in Shulchan Aruch and the Lashon Gemara, we don't have a clear ruling like one or the other. And therefore, we've got this very unusual situation. The Ovid Kemar Ovid, the Ovid Kemar Ovid. You can choose to follow Rabbanon, you can choose to follow Rabbi Yehuda. So you can choose to daven Mincha at 8:30, and you can choose to daven Ma'ariv at 8:30. But you have to pick one or the other. You can't take both. Yeah. So now he's saying, if you did like Rabbanon and you daven Mincha at 8:30, then you can't daven Ma'ariv at 8:45. Because either it's Zman Mincha or Zman Ma'ariv. And if you daven Ma'ariv, if you want to daven Ma'ariv at 8 o'clock, okay, but then you should be davening Mincha before 7:30. Because this zone is either Ma'ariv time or Mincha time. You can't have it Mincha and Ma'ariv time. Having said that, many shuls do exactly what I just what was said. It shouldn't, and their argument is they would not get a minyan for Ma'ariv if they wouldn't have Mincha Ma'ariv one after the other. Okay, so there's many shuls are lenient on that, but that's the position of the Mechaber, that you cannot choose. You have to choose one or the other. The impression you get from the Mechaber is that you should make a lifetime decision. Either you're going to follow Rabbi Yehuda or you're going to follow Rabbanon. However, Birkei Yosef and others, that's Chidah, so he writes that, he quotes from the Meiri, that it means on the one day you shouldn't be combining to follow Rabbi Chachomim and Rabbi Yehuda on the same day, to daven Mincha Ma'ariv within the same zone of between Plag Mincha and sunset. But from one day to the other, one day you're following Rabbi Yehuda, one day you're following Rabbanon, he says that is quite okay, and it's not a contradiction, because he brings examples of precedents in halacha where you can choose one day like this, one day like that, and he says that's okay. So long as they're not mamash direct in conflict, that's okay. So what I did tell him is, it's legitimate that one Shabbos is going to be davening Ma'ariv early, and the other Shabbosim he'll be davening Mincha at that time. That is legitimate because it's not on the same day. Right, let's move on. Okay, this is a question about psukim written on T-shirts. It's coming up to like a boimer, and some of these T-shirts have got a posuk from Tehillim, Hinim HaTovim HaNoim Shevas Achim Gam Yochad. And I'm sure the question has been addressed before, but one conscientious young mother is asking, my boy is wearing such a T-shirt, and he needs to use the room without a mezuzah. Does he have to take off the T-shirt each time? This is the question. Yeah. So I'm sure the question has been addressed before. I did reach out to someone who may have knowledge about this, whether it has been a psak. What I can tell you is that Rabbi Moshe Wiener, who is famous for his encyclopedic work on beards, Hadras Ponim Zokein. So in the Kovetz Razash, which was published, a memorial volume for Reb Zalman Shimon Dvorkin, so Reb Moshe Wiener has a brilliant article about Tzivus Hashem. Now, Tzivus Hashem was launched around Tofshin Mem Aleph and then you got these kids wearing the emblems, the logo, and it says on it Tzivus Hashem. Now, Tzvois is one of the names of Hashem. So is it okay for the kids to be running around wherever with the Tzivos Hashem? And so the question was both on the word Tzivos, the letter Hashem, and he explores this very well, and he shows how it's okay, because the word Tzivos Hashem is not a reference to Hashem. The Tzivos means the Yidden are the army of Hashem. So it's the armies that doesn't have a kedusha, and the letter Hashem is a hey. It's not Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's not one of the 7 names. So he does find that okay. But here we have a posuk, which is a quote straight from, as I said, a posuk from Tehillim. Would it be legitimate? Is there, or there's other way around? Is there a heter that you don't? It's okay to wear it in a place where you're not allowed to bring Divrei Torah. So what I have on the screen is I have a sefer called Ginzei HaKodesh, which is all about Shemus, etc., and Kedusha of script, etc. And he gives a reference, and he brings here about $1, which has Hashem's name written on the dollar. So most Poskim say it's okay to carry $1 into the Beis HaKisei, although there are those who are machmir. Then in the notes he has apparently 100 shekel note in Eretz Yisrael. At one stage they put on a posuk, or several psukim, but it was very small writing. Then again that was dismissed. But then he has the Ein Kavanosam Klal Leposuk. I don't know what that means. Then he brings from Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach that it's okay to carry this 100 shekel note into Beis HaMerchatz, etc. He gives a different reason, And he says, it's not as strict as erasing. So to erase a pasuk, would be stricter, but taking it into a place such as a mokim, which is not a tznius place, is less of a problem. And so that's why he allows the carrying of these banknotes, which have got psukim. He says because you're not erasing it, you're just carrying it into a basic. You say it's not such a problem. That's as far as I managed to get with my research. I don't like to say this attitude, the ein kavanosum klal leposuk, to say that there's no intent of a posuk there. In our case, I don't know what's written in the banknote, but clearly here, the intent is the posuk. You want to invoke the idea of hine matov, that there's achdus of Eden, definitely is the intent to quote the posuk. So I am a little bit, I'm not sure, but we have, Reb Shlomo Zalman does have it's sad to say it's not as bad as erasing it. So you wouldn't be allowed to set fire to such a thing, etc., to burn it. But I'm sorry, I didn't. What's been on my mind, I didn't carry it out. In the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, he has something about not when you talk about decorations of a sukkah. He talks about not taking a pumpkin and carving out Basukkos Teish Shivas Yomim. You shouldn't carve that out in a pumpkin, and because it'll later come to disgrace. So that might have an impact on our discussion. I'm sorry I didn't go through that before the shir. Now, coming back to just a little bit of feedback. So if you remember, we had this discussion about Hagber, which way to rotate, and do you do half a circle, 3/4, just a quarter? I mentioned last week also the story I put on the screen, a letter from Reb Leibel Bistritsky, saying that the Rebbe had taught him and several other young people to do Hagber just a quarter. Turn to your left and do just to 1/4, then you put it down. So here, a particular mishpoche, his name is Reb Mendel Monschein, and he sent me a letter, fascinating, that someone told him that the minhag of putting down the Sefer Torah after Hagber, which is unique to Chabad pretty much, that was introduced in the time when the Frierdiker Rebbe was, he was paralyzed. He would stand for Hagber, and when you do Hagber and you sit down and you roll the Sefer Torah, it takes longer till you're finished. So the Rebbe would stay, the Frierdiker Rebbe that is, would stay standing until Hagber was done. So in order to make it quicker, they introduced this idea of putting the Sefer Torah back on the bimah. So then that shortened the process, and the Rebbe was able to sit down. That's what this story which is telling. Now here on the screen we have a letter of the Rebbe to Rav Zevin, and this is in Tov Shin Chov in 1960. And Rav Zevin is writing to the Rebbe that in the shul somewhere in Shalayim, they had started doing changes about Hagber, and the changes were that they were following the minhag which was done in 770, the shul of Frierdiker. So, and Rav Zevin was complaining about this, introducing a minhag which was not the local minhag of Hagber. And so the Rebbe responds that perhaps you might be right not to change the minhag, especially, and this is very important, especially this was the minhag of Ziknei Anash in previous generations, Bevoyom le'eretz HaKodesh, that when they came to Eretz Yisrael, that they followed the minhag of Eretz Yisrael of doing Hagber the way it was done in Eretz Yisrael. Says the Rebbe, however, now that these young people, I presume, have said, we want to do Hagber the way it's done in 770. So to start cooling that off he says that's cooling off someone's hiskashrus. That's not a good idea. Even if they're overstepping the hiskashrus, even as it's perhaps out of order, but to start putting a dampen on hiskashrus, the Rebbe says that's not a good idea. And then he says further that someone who comes into this shul and see, oh, they're doing the Hagbah like this, and ask, where's it come from? So the answer will be, Minig Avisein in the Sienu. There's the idea of when they in the Beis Hamikdash, they said, is the light until Chevron or something? So they've been saying that there is a mile of people come in. Why they're doing it this way? Ad Chevron. That's how the Rebbeim are doing it. What I found very, very strange is that this suggestion that until 1940, Chabad were doing Hagbah like everyone else, and then it changed because of the Frierdiker Rebbe's help. It could be. I'm not old enough to remember. These things are possible. It was really interesting, though, that how would this change have reached to the Yidden in Russia behind the Iron Curtain for decades? And I never heard anyone to say that in Russia they used to do it differently. Furthermore, my reading of this phrase to Rav Zevin, Shekein Noga Zikni Anash, B'doyrus Shekodmu Bevoyim Le'eretz HaKodesh. That the Zikni Anash, when they emigrated to Israel, they followed Hagbah one way, which means until then, they Hagbah the other way. So I'm more inclined to say that that the Hagbah was done back in Russia, historically was done the same way we would do it now. But what I would suggest is that, if you remember last week, I was questioning Rabbi Bistritsky's story that the Rebbe told him to do a quarter turn. Possibly that was at that time. That the Frierdiker Rebbe is in 770, he's at davening, they lift the Sefer Torah, the Rebbe is standing until Hagbah is over. Okay, just do it quickly, do a quarter turn, the Rebbe will see it, put it down, then the Rebbe is able to relax, able to take his seat. It could be that's where it came from. And as you remember, if you remember from last week, I was saying that we saw that in 770 it was not followed to just do a quarter turn, and it doesn't fit the brisa and all that kind of, all the sources we had last week. And so to say it was a heros, sure, because the Rebbe is struggling to stand and to, all right, I can understand that, and that would resolve the various contradictions between. Okay. Another point of feedback, which is not on your list, it was added to me later. If you remember last week, we had a whole thing about singing of girls in the presence of their brothers. And I brought a quote from the Kloisenberger Rov. So someone called Reb Tzvi Levitin pointed out to me that actually I had misread the Kloisenberger. I had two quotes, one from Rav Fisher and one from the Kloisenberger Rov. Rav Fisher is also clearly talking about families and brothers and sisters, and he is lenient about that. The Kloisenberger Rov is talking about father and daughter. That although their affectionate contact is permitted, and therefore the singing, hearing of the singing of a father to his daughter would be okay, but the Kloisenberger is not talking about brothers and sisters. So so I stand corrected on that. I'm going to chaperein one last point about going back. If you remember last week, also talking about rotating, right to your right or to your left. I'm sure you remember this discussion, and what I said was that there, according to Tzemach Tzedek, that it's more correct to rotate to your left rather than to rotate to your right, because that's working backwards, they're working forwards. Okay, so that's how we do it by Boyev Sholem. So just this week, we're learning a Gemara about the pious in the Beis Hamikdash. So you have the selection process, which Kohanim are going to have the privilege to do the Karbanos. So you have the way it says in the Gemara, Chuliar, the Kohanim are standing around in a circle, and there's a Mamuna, there's a warden or whatever, standing in the middle, and he takes off the turban of one of them. This is in the Lishkas Hagos, in the side chamber, and he counts from him, and he has a number, and he goes around and around. The one who the chosen number finishes, he is the winner of today's selection process. Okay, but there are 13 privileges for today. And so the way the Gemara says is that the one who wins, he is the first of the 13. and the subsequent 12 people next to him, they are given the other 12 privileges in sequence. So we've got here the Kohanim standing in a circle, and then the Memunah stops by one of them, and then the person next to him gets privilege number 2 and number 3, etc. Which side? Which way was the warden, this Memunah, which way was he rotating? Was he rotating to his right or rotating to his left? Which means, and no one really comments on that. At least I didn't find anyone commenting on the movements of the Memunah. What it does say, though, Rashi says that the second one is standing to the right of the first one. So you got here, Reuven wins the selection. Shimon is standing to the right of Reuven. Okay, so then he gets the second privilege and so on. It follows to me that if the man who's standing to my right, if the Memunah is turning clockwise, the man who's standing to my right has already been passed. He's been rejected by the selection. Selection has passed him. So why should he now be given the privilege? Whereas if you say the Memunah is working anti-clockwise, so he comes to Reuven, okay, Reuven wins, then after Reuven, he would move further, would be Shimon stand to the right of Reuven. So I'm suggesting that since Rashi says that the next privilege is given to the one standing to the right, so then of the first winner, therefore that would suggest that the Memunah would actually be moving anti-clockwise, as we discussed about by Boy Rishonim. Just to finish off, especially for those who came late, Bez Hashem, very exciting that the campaign for raising funds for the printing of Siddur Rabbeinu Zoken, you can see it's 3 beautiful volumes. Bez Hashem, the inside will be much more beautiful than the outside, and the outside will get torn and worn out. But Bez Hashem, that's been launched, and looking for funders to reach our goal of $60,000. So there's dedication opportunities, as you can see on the screen. And so if you are game for dedication, let's be in touch. Okay, wish you all a good night and a very good Shabbos, and we should hear Suras Tovis, Yeshuas and Nechomis, especially from the Yidden in Eretz HaKodesh. We should see a Geula Shlema, the Moshiach Tzidkeinu, Meher Rameinu Mamish.
Good Shabbos.
Good job.